I woke up to the sound of my own name. Soft, hesitant, almost afraid. For a moment, I thought I had imagined it. The remnants of a dream clinging to the edges of my consciousness. But then I heard it again, muffled, hushed. Samantha's voice. She was in the next room, her tone low, urgent. I turned my head slightly, just enough to see the glow of her phone through the crack in the door. My heart, steady and calm only moments before, now beat a little faster. I stayed still, listening. Not yet, she whispered. He doesn't know. The air in my lungs turned cold. A conversation that was never meant for me to hear. A truth creeping into the shadows of my marriage. I closed my eyes, forcing myself to breathe. This wasn't the first time I had felt something was wrong. But doubt is a funny thing. It lets you rewrite reality, smooth over rough edges, convince yourself that maybe, just maybe, you're imagining things. Not this time. Samantha's voice lowered even more, her footsteps moving. Then silence. I opened my eyes. And just like that, the life I thought I had was over. By morning, she was back to normal. Smiling, humming while she made coffee, brushing against me in that effortless way she always did, like muscle memory. I watched her closely, searching for something, guilt, hesitation, a flicker of uncertainty in her movements. But she was flawless. Too flawless. I took the coffee she handed me, felt the warmth of her fingers as they lingered against mine. Did you sleep okay? She asked. A simple question, one she had asked 1,000 times before. I took a sip of my coffee and nodded. Yeah, you. She smiled. Like a baby. And just like that, I knew she was lying. The thing about secrets is that they rot. Slowly at first, almost imperceptibly, like a crack in glass. But once you see it, you can't unsee it. I started to notice things. Samantha was checking her phone more often. Late-night texts, quickly swiped away. Unexplained absences, grocery runs that took hours, work meetings she had never mentioned before. And then there was the way she looked at me. Not with love, not even with indifference. With calculation. Like she was waiting for something. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. That maybe I was just being paranoid. But deep down, I already knew the truth. I just didn't have proof. Yet, I waited for the right moment. The night she went to bed early, claiming a headache, I stayed awake. Listening. Waiting for the rhythmic pattern of her breathing to settle into sleep. Then I took her phone. I had always respected her privacy. Never once in our 8 years of marriage had I checked her messages, her emails. Tonight was different. Her phone was locked, of course, but I knew her passcode. She thought she was clever, changing it every few weeks. But habits are hard to break, and I knew her better than she thought I did. The screen unlocked. Messages. Calls. Deleted history. I went deeper, bypassing security settings, recovering fragments of conversations she had tried to erase. And then I found it. A single message. Everything is in place. He won't suspect a thing. I read it twice. 3 times. Every part of me wanted to believe there was an explanation. That maybe I had missed something. That maybe this wasn't what it looked like. But the cold weight in my stomach told me otherwise. This wasn't an affair. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a plan. And I was the target. I left for work the next morning like nothing had changed. Samantha kissed me at the door, her lips soft, her hands lingering just long enough to feel real. Have a good day, she said. I smiled. You too. Then I got in my car and drove 3 blocks before pulling over and making a call. Asher Tate picked up on the second ring. Tell me you're not calling me for a favor. I need information. A pause. On who? My wife. The silence stretched. Nathan. I need you to check her phone records, bank transactions, travel history. Everything. Another pause. Then a sigh. Are you sure about this? I need to be. No hesitation in his response. I'll get back to you. I hung up, gripping the steering wheel. Outside, the world moved as it always had. People rushing to work, walking their dogs, sipping coffee from paper cups. But my world had shifted, and I had a feeling it would never be the same again. I don't remember how long I sat in my car outside that hotel. Maybe minutes. Maybe hours. The neon lights flickered against the windshield, washing everything in a cold, artificial glow. I could still see Samantha in my mind, walking through those glass doors like she belonged there. Like she had done it before. And maybe she had. A part of me wanted to go inside. To march up to that front desk, get her room number, and see the truth for myself. But another part, the part that had been trained to assess before acting, knew it wouldn't change anything. I had already seen enough. The woman I trusted more than anyone had been lying to me. And not just in whispers behind closed doors. This was something bigger, more deliberate, more dangerous. She wasn't just hiding something. She was hiding me. I drove aimlessly for a while, the city blurring past in streaks of red and white lights. My hands gripped the wheel too tight, knuckles aching. I thought about all the small things I had ignored. The late nights, the bank withdrawals, the way she had smiled at me over dinner just last night, laughing at some story I had told, resting her hand on mine as if everything was fine. It wasn't fine. It had never been fine. By the time I reached the safe house, my body felt heavy, like I was moving through water. I closed the door behind me, locked it, and pressed my back against the wood. For the first time in years, I let myself feel the weight of betrayal. It wasn't just about Samantha working with Calderon. It wasn't just about the messages or the secrecy. It was her. The woman I had built a life with. The woman I had planned a future with. The woman who knew everything about me, my habits, my weaknesses, the things I never said out loud. And now, I had to accept the truth. She was planning to erase me from her life. Asher called the next morning. "You okay?" It was a simple question, but the way he said it told me he already knew the answer. "I need more," I said. My voice didn't sound like my own. "I need details. Proof. I need to know everything." He exhaled. "I pulled her financials. The money she's been moving, it's going to offshore accounts connected to Calderon's shell companies. The same ones we flagged last year during the arms smuggling investigation." I closed my eyes briefly. "She's been involved longer than I thought." "That's not all," Asher continued. "I ran a deep dive into her recent activity. There were flagged communications between her and someone inside Homeland Security. It's classified, but from what I can tell, she's been feeding Calderon your data." A slow, icy sensation spread through my chest. "My data?" "Yeah." A pause. "Your records. Your movements. Even your old case files. She's been tracking you." "Tracking me?" "Samantha. The woman I fell asleep next to every night." I stood there, phone pressed to my ear, staring at the blank wall in front of me. She had been gathering intelligence on me like I was a target. Like I was a job. The floor felt unsteady beneath me. "What are they planning?" I finally asked. "We don't know yet. But it's big." I nodded slowly, even though he couldn't see me. My mind was already moving 3 steps ahead. She thought she was winning. She thought I was out of the way. She had no idea I was watching. And that changed everything. That night, I packed a small bag, only the essentials. Weapons, burner phones, cash. If Samantha had been tracking me, I couldn't leave a single trace behind. Then, I set the trap. I sent her a text like I always did when traveling. "Landed in Chicago. Long day. I'll call you tomorrow. Love you." Her reply came within seconds. "Glad you made it safe. Miss you already." I stared at those words for a long time. The ease with which she lied. The way she still played the part, even when she thought I was miles away. For a brief second, I almost let myself feel it. The grief, the anger, the loss. But emotions wouldn't help me now. I had spent my life hunting men like Calderon. I had spent years tracking threats before they reached their targets. And now, I was the target. I was done waiting. It was time for her to learn exactly who she was dealing with. The next morning, I watched from a secure feed as Samantha moved through our house. She checked her phone constantly, glancing toward the door, expecting me to be gone. Then, just past noon, she made the call. Her voice was soft, but not like it used to be when she spoke to me. No warmth. No hesitation. "Everything is in place," she said. A pause. "He won't suspect a thing." My fingers curled into fists. That was all I needed to hear. I had spent years protecting people from men like Calderon. I had spent years believing in Samantha. She had no idea what was coming. There's a moment, just before the truth fully sinks in, when your mind fights to hold on to the life you thought you had. A split second where it whispers maybe you're wrong. Maybe this is all a misunderstanding. Maybe there's another explanation. But that moment never lasts. I sat in my car outside our house, gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. The phone in my lap still displayed the last message Samantha had sent. "Everything is in place. He won't suspect a thing." She had said those words. My wife. The woman I had trusted with my life. Now, she was planning to erase me from it. I exhaled, steadying myself. I had spent years outmaneuvering criminals, breaking into encrypted networks, predicting threats before they arrived at my doorstep. Yet somehow, I had let the biggest threat of all slip into my bed every night. Not anymore. I checked the time, 2:34 a.m. The house was dark. She was asleep. Good. I needed to see her one last time before I decided what came next. I moved through the house silently, muscle memory guiding me through the dark. I had walked these floors 1,000 times before, but tonight, they felt unfamiliar. I stopped at our bedroom door, watching her. Samantha lay on her side, her breathing deep and steady. She looked peaceful, untouched by guilt. I wanted to shake her awake, to demand answers, to see if she had the decency to admit what she had done. Instead, I just stood there, listening to the sound of her breathing. Then, just as I turned to leave, her voice cut through the darkness. "You're home early." I froze. She didn't sound startled. She didn't even open her eyes. I had spent years reading people, but at that moment, I couldn't tell if she was truly half asleep, or if she had been waiting for me. I forced my voice to stay even. "Yeah, flight got canceled." She shifted, finally blinking up at me. In the dim glow of the city lights filtering through the blinds, her eyes were unreadable. "That's too bad," she murmured. Lies. I wanted to believe she felt something, regret, hesitation, anything, but her voice was smooth, controlled. She had known I'd come back, and she wasn't afraid. The next morning, I played my part. I kissed her goodbye, told her I'd be in meetings all day, let her think everything was normal. She smiled, leaned up on her toes to fix my collar. "You've been distracted lately," she said lightly. "Everything okay?" I almost laughed. Instead, I nodded. "Just work." She searched my face for a moment, then kissed my cheek. "Come home early if you can." She was still acting, still pretending. And that was the moment I knew there was nothing left to save. By noon, Asher had sent me everything I needed. Bank transactions, call logs, messages hidden behind layers of encryption. Samantha had been feeding Calderon information for months. She hadn't just betrayed me. She had sold me out. My entire professional career, every classified project I had worked on, every security system I had ever built, she had been handing it all over. And in return, I had no idea what Calderon had promised her. Money? Power? A life without me? It didn't matter. What mattered was that she had made a mistake. She had underestimated me. That night, I followed her. She left home just past 10, dressed too carefully for a quick errand. I let her believe she wasn't being watched. She drove across town to a high-rise hotel. A man was waiting for her outside. Even from a distance, I recognized him. Elias Calderon. Vincent Calderon's younger brother. The weak link. I exhaled slowly, forcing my pulse to steady. I could storm in, confront her, let the anger take over. Or I could use this. Use her. And that was exactly what I was going to do. I parked down the street, watching as Samantha and Elias disappeared inside. I waited, counted the seconds, let the weight of what I was about to do settle in. Then, I stepped out of the car and followed. The hotel was expensive, one of those places where money did all the talking. I walked through the lobby like I belonged there, straight to the elevators. No hesitation, no second-guessing. I had spent years moving through places I wasn't supposed to be. Tonight was no different. I took the elevator to the top floor. The doors slid open, revealing a hallway lined with suites. I moved quickly, quietly, checking each number. And then, I found it. Room 1703. I didn't knock. I picked the lock in under 30 seconds and stepped inside. The suite was empty. A half-finished glass of wine sat on the table. Samantha's coat was draped over a chair. I moved further in, checking the bedroom. No one. Then I heard the shower running. I exhaled slowly, stepping back into the shadows just as the bathroom door opened. Samantha emerged first, wrapped in a robe, towel-drying her hair. Elias followed a second later, saying something low in Spanish. Then he saw me, and everything stopped. His face went pale. His body tensed. Samantha turned at the change in his posture, her eyes widening when she saw me standing there. For the first time since this started, I saw real fear in her eyes. "Nathan," she breathed. I tilted my head slightly, taking in the scene. Surprised? She swallowed hard. I held up a hand. "Don't. Not now." I looked at Elias, whose gaze darted between us, calculating his next move. I gave him a slow, easy smile. "You and I need to have a conversation." 5 minutes later, Elias was tied to a chair. Samantha stood frozen by the bed, her back pressed against the wall, staring at me like she didn't recognize me. I met her eyes. "Sit down." She didn't move. "Samantha," I said evenly. "Sit down." Slowly she did. I turned back to Elias. "You're going to tell me everything. who Calderon is working with, what he has planned, and why she is involved. He let out a shaky breath. And if I don't? I leaned in closer, my voice dropping to a whisper. Then I call your brother and tell him you talked. Elias swallowed hard. I sat back. Let's begin. Elias Calderon had stopped struggling. Not because he had given up, but because he was thinking. I saw it in the way his gaze flicked towards Samantha, the way his fingers clenched against the arms of the chair, the way his lips pressed into a thin line like he was calculating odds. You think you can scare me? He muttered, shifting in the chair I had tied him to. His voice held forced confidence, but I could hear it, the crack underneath, the fear creeping in. I exhaled slowly, running a hand over my jaw. I was exhausted. Not just physically, but mentally, emotionally. I didn't want to play games anymore. No, Elias, I said quietly. I think your brother can. He flinched. Barely. Just a small reaction. But it was there. I tilted my head, watching him. You're reckless, I continued. You think money fixes everything. You think loyalty is something you can buy. But your brother? He doesn't think like that. Vincent only cares about control. And if he even suspects you talk to me. I didn't need to finish the sentence. Elias knew what would happen. The silence stretched. Then he exhaled. A slow, controlled breath. What do you want? I should have felt relief. I should have felt something. But as Elias shifted, as he looked towards Samantha again, I realized the real weight pressing on my chest wasn't him. It was her. She hadn't spoken since I tied Elias to the chair. She was watching everything, her expression unreadable, her hands clasped in her lap. I forced myself to look at her. Really look at her. 8 years. 8 years of late-night talks. Of Sunday morning coffee. Of whispered promises in the dark. And now, I didn't recognize the woman sitting in front of me. Had I ever known her at all? My stomach twisted, but I forced my voice to stay even. How long? Samantha blinked, finally meeting my gaze. What? I swallowed hard. How long have you been working with Calderon? She hesitated. Not because she didn't know the answer, but because she was deciding if she wanted to lie. And that was what made my chest ache. I wasn't her husband to her anymore. I was an obstacle. Finally, she exhaled. Over a year. A sharp pain shot through my ribs, but I ignored it. And the files. My voice was quiet now, steady. The classified intelligence you were feeding him? Samantha swallowed. I took a step forward. Don't tell me it was nothing. Don't insult me. For the first time, something flickered in her expression. Regret? Guilt? Or was it just another act? She exhaled, shaking her head. It was never about you, Nathan. I let out a dry, humorless laugh. You told Calderon everything about me. My records. My movements. And it wasn't about me. She bit her lip. It was bigger than that. I clenched my jaw. Bigger how? She hesitated again. That was the final confirmation I needed. There was more. More that she wasn't saying. And suddenly, I saw it. The fear in her eyes wasn't just because of me. She was afraid of something else. Someone else. I turned back to Elias. Who else is involved? He smirked, but it was weak. Forced. You already know, he said. And then, I did. The only way Samantha could have accessed certain files, the only way she could have slipped under every security measure, was if she had help. Someone inside. My stomach dropped. This wasn't just Calderon. This was bigger. I took a slow, steady breath. Who? Samantha shook her head. Nathan, please. Who? My voice was sharp now, almost desperate. Elias just gave me a tired smile. I had spent years chasing ghosts, tracking criminals who stayed in the shadows, uncovering secrets buried under layers of lies. And now, I was standing face to face with the biggest lie of all. I had been played. By my own wife. I ran a hand over my face, forcing myself to focus. My plan had been simple. Get Elias, get information, and use it. But now, everything had changed. Elias watched me carefully. If you let me go, I can make sure Vincent doesn't come after you. I let out a small breath. That's adorable. His jaw tensed. Then what do you want? I turned to Samantha. She was sitting rigidly now, her hands clenched together. She knew what was coming. What I want, I said slowly, is for you to do exactly what you were going to do before I walked through that door. Elias frowned. And what's that? I smiled. You're going to take her back to Vincent. Samantha flinched. What? She breathed. I looked at her. Really looked at her. You're going to tell him everything is still on track. That I never found out. That I never came back. Elias narrowed his eyes. And what do you get? I exhaled. Time. Time to find out who else was involved. Time to turn the game around. Because if this was bigger than Calderon, if Samantha had been working with someone else, then I needed to disappear before they realized I was a step ahead. Samantha shook her head, standing up suddenly. No. I raised an eyebrow. No. She exhaled sharply, her hands shaking now. If you send me back to Vincent, he'll kill me the second he finds out I failed. I tilted my head. Then I guess you better not fail. Something broke in her expression. For the first time, I saw something real. Not guilt. Not anger. Fear. And not for me. For herself. The silence stretched between us. I turned to Elias. You have 1 hour to make the call, I said. Tell Vincent everything is fine. Elias hesitated. And if I don't? I gave him a small, cold smile. Then I call him first. Realization dawned in Elias's eyes. Either way, he was trapped. Samantha's breathing was uneven now. I could feel it. The moment she realized I wasn't going to let her out of this. The moment she realized she had lost control. I turned back to her, my voice quiet. You wanted to play the game, Samantha? I took a step closer, watching the way her throat bobbed as she swallowed. Then let's play. The first morning after the divorce was official, I woke up before the sun. The house was quiet. Peaceful. For the first time in weeks, I didn't wake up with a weight crushing my chest. There was no dread sitting in my stomach, no paranoia about what Madeline was doing, who she was with, or what new lies she was spinning. It was just stillness. I pulled myself out of bed and walked to the kitchen, starting the coffee like I had 100 times before. But today, something was different. Today, I wasn't making a second cup for her. And that realization hit harder than I expected. For 10 years, every small thing I did had been part of us. Coffee in the mornings. Text throughout the day. Coming home. Talking about work. Eating dinner together. Falling asleep beside her. But now, it was just me. I leaned against the counter, staring at the coffee as it brewed, the quiet hum filling the empty kitchen. And then, the sound of small feet padding across the floor. I turned, and there was Emily, wrapped in her blanket, her hair a mess, still heavy with sleep. For a second, I thought she'd go back upstairs, but instead, she walked right up to me and rested her head against my chest. Morning, Dad, she mumbled. I swallowed past the lump in my throat, wrapping my arms around her. Morning, kiddo. That day, I cleaned the house from top to bottom. Not just because it needed it, but because I needed it. I needed to erase the pieces of Madeline that still lingered. The clothes she left behind? Gone. The framed wedding photos? Put away. The bedsheets? Changed. Every little thing that still smelled like her, still reminded me of the life we had built. I let it go. Not out of anger. Not out of spite. But because I finally understood something. The marriage I was mourning? It wasn't real. The love I thought I had? It was mine. But it had never truly been hers. And I couldn't spend the rest of my life holding on to something that had never been real. That weekend, Emily and I went to the lake. The same lake I had been driving to when my whole world fell apart. But this time, it wasn't an escape. This time, it was a new beginning. She sat beside me on the dock, her fishing rod in her hands, her brows furrowed in concentration. Like this, she asked, adjusting her grip. I smiled. Yeah, just let it sit for a while. Be patient. She huffed. I hate waiting. I chuckled, ruffling her hair. Yeah, me too. She fell quiet for a moment, staring at the water. Then she spoke. Mom called. I tensed, but I kept my face neutral. Yeah, she wants to see me. I nodded, waiting. Emily bit her lip. I don't know if I'm ready. I exhaled, my chest aching for her. You don't have to be. She looked up at me, her eyes uncertain. But she's still my mom, right? I swallowed hard. Yeah, sweetheart. She is. She hesitated. Do you hate her? The question caught me off guard. I thought about it. Really thought about it. I should have hated her. For everything she had done. For how she had broken us. For how she had shattered our family like it was nothing. But hate? No. I shook my head. No, I don't. Emily studied me, like she was trying to figure out if I was lying. But I don't love her anymore either, I admitted. And that's okay. She nodded slowly, looking back at the water. Yeah, I think so too. The sun started setting, casting golden light across the lake. The sky was streaked with oranges and purples, the kind of beauty that made you stop and breathe. For the first time in a long time, I felt light. Not broken. Not bitter. Just okay. I looked over at Emily, at the girl who had been my reason to keep going, my reason to hold on when everything felt like it was slipping away. We're gonna be all right, kiddo, I murmured. She smiled, her line tugging just slightly in the water. Yeah, Dad, she said. I know. And for the first time in months, I believed it too. I sat in the car, fingers wrapped tightly around the steering wheel, watching through the rain-speckled windshield as Samantha and Elias disappeared inside the warehouse. This was it. The moment everything came full circle. For days, I had been unraveling a web of lies, trying to separate the truth from the deception, trying to understand how the woman I had loved had turned into someone I no longer recognized. But now, none of that mattered. There was no more time for questions. No more time for regrets. It was time to finish this. I pulled my hood over my head, took a deep breath, and stepped out into the night. The warehouse smelled of damp concrete and stale cigarette smoke. Dim lights flickered overhead, casting long shadows across the metal walls. The air was thick with tension, men in suits standing near the entrance, their hands resting casually on their weapons. I moved carefully, staying in the darkness, watching from above as Samantha and Elias approached a tall man in a dark gray suit. Vincent Calderon. I had only ever seen him in photographs before, but now, up close, he was even more imposing. Everything about him, the way he stood, the way he scanned the room, the way people around him reacted to his every movement, spoke of power. This was a man who controlled everything around him, a man who never lost. Until tonight. I inched forward, keeping my breathing steady. My pulse thrummed in my ears as I watched Samantha lift her chin and greet him. She was playing her role perfectly. For a moment, I almost believed her. Almost. But then Calderon did something unexpected. He laughed. Not the kind of laugh that comes from genuine amusement. The kind that knows something you don't. And in that instant, I knew. He was onto her. Did you really think I wouldn't find out? Calderon's voice was smooth, almost amused. Samantha stiffened. I don't know what you're talking about. Calderon clicked his tongue, shaking his head. Oh, come on, Samantha. You disappoint me. After all this time, after all I've given you, you thought you could play me. I could see it, the way her breathing changed, the way her fingers twitched at her sides. She was losing control. Vincent, listen to me. He raised a hand, and the room shifted. The men at his side stepped forward, weapons subtly adjusting. Samantha's voice faltered. I knew that look in her eyes. She was out of moves. She turned slightly, as if searching for Elias. But he wasn't looking at her. He was looking at me. And in that moment, I understood. Elias had betrayed her. The way she had betrayed me. I moved before I could think. One shot. Then another. The men closest to Calderon collapsed, the sound of suppressed gunfire echoing through the warehouse. Chaos erupted as people scrambled for cover, shouts and gunfire filling the air. Samantha ducked, her eyes wide as she spotted me. Nathan. I ignored her, reloading as I moved toward Calderon. He was already backing away, reaching for his own weapon, barking orders in rapid Spanish. I took aim. A sharp crack rang out. Pain exploded in my side. I staggered, pressing a hand against the wound. Samantha's scream cut through the noise. I turned, just in time to see Elias holding the gun. His hands were shaking, his eyes wide, his chest rising and falling rapidly. You should have stayed out of this, he muttered. I gritted my teeth, pushing past the pain. And let you walk away? Elias hesitated. Just for a second. And that was all I needed. I lunged. The gun went off again, but this time, it missed. I slammed into him, knocking him back. The gun slipped from his grasp, skidding across the floor. For a brief moment, we struggled, but he was younger, weaker. He never stood a chance. Within seconds, he was on the ground, gasping for air as I pressed my knee against his chest. He choked, his fingers clawing at my arms. Nathan. I didn't loosen my grip. You shot me. My voice was eerily calm. His breathing was uneven. I didn't have a choice. I let out a breathless laugh. Neither do I. Then I let go. Elias slumped, unconscious. I didn't check if he was still breathing. I didn't care. I turned just in time to see Samantha standing over Calderon. He was on his knees, blood staining the front of his expensive suit, breathing heavily. Her hands were shaking. She had a gun, and she was pointing it at him. For a long moment, they just stared at each other. Then Calderon laughed again, spitting blood onto the floor. Go on then, he rasped. You think this makes you free? Samantha's fingers twitched. Her breathing was ragged, uneven. Nathan, she whispered, her voice breaking. I swallowed hard, forcing my emotions down. It's your choice. She closed her eyes. Then, after what felt like an eternity, she lowered the gun. Calderon smirked. That's what I thought. And then a final shot rang out. I turned just in time to see Celeste lowering her weapon. Calderon hit the ground, unmoving. She exhaled sharply, shaking her head. You two take too long. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. It was over. Finally, over. Samantha sat on the edge of the loading dock, staring at the horizon. She hadn't spoken since the warehouse. The wound in my side throbbed, but I ignored it, stepping up beside her. She didn't look at me. I never wanted this, she murmured. I sighed, running a hand over my face. You made your choices, Sam. Her throat bobbed as she swallowed. So did you. I didn't argue. We sat there for a long time, neither of us speaking. Then, finally, she turned to me. What now? I studied her. For years, I had thought she was my home. Now, she was just a woman I used to know. I pulled a small envelope from my pocket and placed it beside her. A passport. A new name. Enough money to disappear. She blinked, staring down at it. You're letting me go? I inhaled deeply. I'm done fighting you, Samantha. Her eyes filled with something close to relief, but not quite. She nodded slowly, fingers brushing against the envelope. And just like that, she stood. She turned once, looking at me like she wanted to say something. Then, without a word, she walked away. I watched her disappear, the wind catching her hair, the weight of everything pressing down on my chest. And for the first time in a long time, I let her go. For good.